In 1939 Texas, a young black boy named Bernard Garrett works as a shoeshine outside the town's main bank, but he's not there for tips. As he shines shoes, he listens carefully to the conversations of wealthy white bankers and businessmen. Bernard purposely works slowly, so he can hear every detail about real estate deals, interest rates, and investment strategies. After each shift, he writes down what he hears in a small notebook. He studies the words he doesn't understand and rewrites the numbers to learn how the business world works. Even as a child, Bernard is determined to one day become a banker. At home, his father notices the notebook filled with financial notes. He's impressed but also concerned. He tells Bernard that no matter how smart he is, the color of his skin will always be a barrier in the South. Bernard listens but doesn't let go of his dream. 15 years later, in 1954, Bernard moves his wife Eunice and their son to Los Angeles, California. The city is less segregated than Texas, and Bernard believes it offers a better chance to succeed. They stay in a cramped utility room at Eunice's uncle's house. Bernard tells Eunice he won't take just any job. He wants to start a real estate business. Though the uncle pushes Bernard to work in a factory, Eunice supports her husband's ambitions. Bernard begins exploring the real estate market. He notices something important. Black neighborhoods in Los Angeles are overcrowded, while white neighborhoods have empty buildings with for rent signs. He realizes there's a high demand among black professionals, doctors, teachers, lawyers, who want better housing options but are locked out by discrimination. He finds an apartment building on the edge of a white neighborhood. It's rundown and half empty, but it sits just blocks from the black community. Bernard sees potential others overlook. He offers the white owner $30,000 up front and promises to pay another $5,000 after he fills the units. The owner refuses. Before leaving, Bernard spots a calendar from the man's bank and notes the name of the manager. He heads to the bank and asks to speak with the man, but the white secretary refuses to let him in. Bernard waits outside for hours. When the manager leaves, Bernard approaches him directly and explains the deal. He says he needs a loan and that the building has great potential. The manager still declines. That night, the property owner calls Bernard. He's upset that Bernard used his name to try to get a loan. Bernard apologizes, expecting the man to be angry. Instead, the owner says he's impressed by Bernard's determination. He agrees to co-sign the loan as a guarantor. With financing secured, Bernard purchases the building, but he soon faces pushback. A white resident sees him on the property and demands to know what he's doing. She calls the police, claiming a black man is pretending to own the building. When officers arrive, Bernard calmly hands them a copy of the title deed. The police verify his ownership and leave. The woman is humiliated. Days later, she moves out. Bernard quickly fills the empty apartments with black tenants. The building becomes profitable. He returns to the seller with the remaining $5,000 and completes the deal. The man, impressed by Bernard's success, offers to go into business together. They agree to a partnership. Bernard will scout and manage properties, while the older white man will act as the public face and handle contract signings. This keeps Bernard's involvement hidden from white sellers and buyers. Together, they acquire more properties across the city. Bernard uses his knowledge of real estate math to estimate rent revenues, property values, and vacancy rates. The partner handles the negotiations in public. Soon, Bernard earns enough to move his family into a spacious, upscale home. His business is booming, but tragedy strikes. A few years later, his partner dies. His wife inherits his shares and immediately dissolves the partnership. She refuses to work with a black man and offers to buy Bernard out at a fraction of the market value. Bernard tries to fight back. He seeks legal help, but without a written contract and in a racially biased system, he has few options. The bank manager, who once helped him, now refuses to meet. The widow holds all the leverage. As Bernard walks through the downtown bank building where the manager works, he notices something. There are 4 banks in the building. All have denied him loans because of his race. Bernard decides that if they won't do business with him, he'll buy the building they work in. Determined to take control, Bernard meets again with Joe Morris, a wealthy black entrepreneur who owns a successful jazz club and several properties in black neighborhoods. Bernard shares his bold plan: buy the downtown bank building, force the banks inside to do business with them, and gain access to financial data that will help them dominate Los Angeles real estate. At first, Joe laughs it off. No black man has ever bought property in that part of town. It's white territory, off limits by custom, if not by law. But Bernard calmly lays out the logic. If they own the building, the banks can't deny them access. It's not just about profit, it's about power. Joe begins to see the potential. He agrees to partner with Bernard, but they face a major obstacle. No white seller will negotiate with two black men. They need a white face, someone to act as the buyer and front for the business. Bernard suggests Matt Steiner, a young white man who once helped him with apartment repairs. Joe is skeptical. Matt is inexperienced, unsure of himself, and knows nothing about real estate. But Bernard believes he can be trained. They pitch the idea to Matt. He's hesitant at first, unsure if he can handle the responsibility. But after reflecting on the opportunity, Matt agrees. The training begins. Bernard teaches Matt how to calculate real estate values using cap rates, net operating income, and vacancy rates. Joe trains him in the art of golf, etiquette, and high society conversation. At first, Matt struggles. He doesn't understand the formulas and stumbles through golf games. But over time, he improves. He memorizes complex equations and rehearses business scenarios. He studies successful businessmen and mimics their behavior. Bernard and Joe drill him with questions, correct his posture, and refine his speech. Eventually, Matt begins to sound and act like a seasoned investor. Joe arranges for Matt to play golf at an elite country club. There, he's introduced to Charles Renault, the white owner of the downtown bank building. The meeting appears accidental, but it's carefully planned. Matt impresses Renault during the game. Later, Bernard and Joe prepare him for a formal negotiation. Bernard calculates every detail of the building's income and expenses. He teaches Matt how to estimate the building's value by counting which offices are lit up at night to determine vacancy rates. Matt memorizes it all. At the negotiation, Renault tries to bluff about the building's worth, but Matt counters with exact numbers. He knows the rental rates, the occupancy figures, and the revenue potential. Renault is caught off guard. Even his accountant can't keep up. In the end, Renault agrees to sell the building. It was listed at $2.4 million, but they closed the deal for $1.56 million. With the building under their control, Bernard and Joe quietly take over the banks inside. The managers who once refused to see Bernard now greet him with respect. Using their new influence, Bernard and Joe expand rapidly. They buy over 100 apartment buildings, many in formerly whites-only neighborhoods. They approve loans for black tenants and create quality housing for families who had been locked out of the market. Their empire grows. Their strategy, using Matt as the public face while Bernard and Joe operate behind the scenes, proves effective. Matt marries a waitress named Susie, who once admired him back when he was just a factory worker. With his new role, he enjoys the lifestyle of a wealthy man, though he isn't truly the one in charge. Meanwhile, Bernard and Joe are recognized for their success. They even receive a visit from the Vice President of the United States. Their business is thriving, and their mission to challenge segregation is making real progress. In 1963, Bernard returns to Texas with his family. He visits his father and takes a walk with his son through his old hometown. They stop outside the same bank where Bernard used to shine shoes. A young black boy is working outside, just like Bernard did years ago. But when Bernard asks for a shoe shine, the boy says he only serves white folks. Bernard is stunned. After all the progress he made in California, his hometown hasn't changed. That moment reignites his resolve. He tells Joe that he wants to buy a bank in Texas, the very system that once excluded him. Joe warns him that the racism in Texas is far more aggressive, but Bernard is firm. He wants to bring opportunity to his people, not just in LA, but in the South. Joe finally agrees. Bernard, Joe, and Matt travel to Bernard's hometown in Willis, Texas. Their goal is to acquire the Mainland Bank, a well-established institution that has long denied loans to black citizens. To avoid suspicion, Matt poses as the wealthy buyer. Joe accompanies him as his chauffeur. Bernard stays behind the scenes. They meet with the bank's owner, Robert Florence Sr., a traditional and reserved white businessman. During the meeting, Matt impresses Florence with his calm demeanor and apparent financial understanding. The deal moves forward, but Florence includes two conditions. First, he demands that his son, Robert Florence Jr., remain at the bank as a senior loan officer. Second, he insists on keeping a 20% ownership stake in the institution. Matt agrees, and the contract is signed. Mainland Bank becomes theirs, at least on paper. Bernard and Joe begin operating quietly from behind the scenes. With help from local black church leaders, Bernard identifies trustworthy loan applicants, working-class families, business owners, and professionals long denied financing. Within weeks, The bank issues dozens of home and business loans to African American customers. The community begins to grow, but Florence Jr. is suspicious. He sees a surge in loan approvals and becomes curious about Matt's methods. He begins tailing Matt and eventually spies on a secret meeting between Matt, Bernard, and Joe. Florence Jr. confronts them. He threatens to tell the town who really owns the bank. He warns that if white customers find out, they'll withdraw their deposits and the bank will collapse. Bernard calmly replies that his father knew who they were when he signed the deal. Florence Jr. doesn't back down. He hands Matt a letter from the U.S. Treasury Department. Mainland Bank is scheduled for a federal audit 1 month early. Florence leaves, confident that the audit will destroy the business. That night, Matt panics. He meets with Bernard and Joe to discuss how to hide the risky loans from the auditors. Matt proposes buying a smaller bank, transferring the controversial loans there, and making it seem like Mainland is clean. Bernard is hesitant. He warns that adding a second bank will strain their resources and invite even more scrutiny, but Matt insists. He wants the freedom to run a bank on his own terms. Joe eventually sides with Matt. Bernard, outnumbered, agrees. They purchase the Bank of Marlin, a small and relatively obscure institution. Matt becomes its public president. Bernard sends Eunice to work there as a janitor, to quietly keep an eye on Matt's decisions. The plan seems simple. Transfer the questionable loans to Marlin. When the audit is over, they'll reassess. Matt is given a list of loan packages. Bernard warns him to review every file carefully and to use their trusted lawyer for legal transfers. But Matt ignores both warnings. Believing in his own rising status, he hires a new lawyer, one recommended by Florence Jr. Matt rushes through the paperwork. He signs off on the loan packages without reading every document in detail. Soon, everything spirals out of control. Within days, Matt receives an alarming phone call from Florence Jr. He warns that white depositors are pulling their money out of Mainland Bank. Word has spread that the bank is secretly issuing loans to black families. Before Matt can respond, Florence delivers more bad news. A federal bank examiner is arriving early, not to Mainland, but to the newly acquired Marlin Bank. The audit is scheduled within the hour. Matt scrambles to prepare. Bernard rushes to Marlin, disguising himself as a janitor so he can stay nearby during the inspection without attracting attention. The bank examiner arrives and begins reviewing Marlin's books. He quickly finds irregularities. Several loans are far too large and risky for a small-town bank like Marlin. The totals exceed federal limits, and the documentation is incomplete. The examiner becomes suspicious. Bernard, observing from a distance, watches the disaster unfold. In a panic, Matt meets Bernard and Joe in a back room. Bernard demands to know how these flawed loans ended up on Marlin's books. Matt insists that he reviewed everything, but Bernard presses him. Did he double-check each loan? Did he use their lawyer? Matt admits that he hired a new lawyer, one recommended by Florence Jr. Bernard and Joe immediately understand what happened. Florence set him up. The fraudulent loans were planted in the package. Matt, rushing and overconfident, signed them without checking. The bank is now in serious legal trouble. Bernard and Joe realize they must act fast. They calculate the financial damage. They'll have to absorb nearly $300,000 in bad debt to protect their main operation. They give Matt a direct order. Shut down Marlin Bank. Cut losses now, before the damage spreads. But Matt refuses. For the first time in his life, he has authority, and he's not ready to give it up. Without informing his partners, Matt takes a dangerous step. He instructs Mainland Bank to repurchase the faulty loans from Marlin at full value. This transaction is illegal. It's a direct violation of federal banking regulations. But Matt pushes it through, believing it will save both banks. It does the opposite. Joe learns about the move from a trusted contact in Los Angeles. He and Bernard rush back to Texas. They confront Matt at the Mainland branch. Bernard demands to see the books. But it's too late. The deputy controller of the currency arrives at the bank. He announces that Mainland's license has been revoked. The bank is now under federal receivership. All operations are suspended immediately. As the three men exit the building, FBI agents appear and arrest Bernard and Joe. Matt is left behind, unharmed and uncharged. After their arrest, Bernard and Joe sit with their lawyer. They learn that the case has grown beyond financial misconduct. The federal government intends to use it as a precedent to tighten banking laws and regain control over financial institutions. Behind closed doors, politicians are alarmed. Two black men have quietly built a real estate and banking empire, using legal but unconventional methods. The system didn't see them coming. Now, the system wants to make an example of them. Meanwhile, Matt is approached by Senator Mullen. The senator offers him a deal, testify that Bernard and Joe manipulated him into illegal deals, and he'll avoid jail. If he doesn't cooperate, he faces up to 50 years in prison. That night, Matt calls Bernard. He confesses everything. He says he never intended to hurt anyone, but the government is threatening him. Bernard listens quietly, offering no promises. The next day, Matt testifies before a U.S. Senate committee. He says Bernard and Joe used him as a frontman, pressured him into signing documents, and made all the real decisions behind his back. He paints himself as a victim, a naive man manipulated by experienced businessmen. The committee listens carefully. The case is no longer just about banking violations. It's now a symbol of racial boundaries and who gets to control wealth in America. Later, Senator Mullen meets with Bernard in private. He offers the same deal. If Bernard admits to orchestrating an illegal scheme and exploiting legal loopholes, the charges might be dropped. Otherwise, he will face prison time. Bernard remains silent. The next morning, Bernard puts on his janitor's uniform, the same one he wore at Marlin Bank. He walks into the Senate hearing room wearing it. He takes the microphone and begins a statement. He says that in Texas, the only way a black man can enter a bank is with a mop and a bucket. He explains that his dream was never just to get rich. He wanted equal access, equal opportunity for all Americans. He challenges the Senate panel. Why is it so important to exclude an entire race of people from the American dream? Why should owning property or receiving a loan be limited to one color? The senators try to interrupt him, but Bernard keeps speaking. He doesn't argue his innocence. He argues for fairness, for the Constitution's promise of equality to finally mean something. His testimony draws national attention. Newspapers cover the hearing. Activists and civil rights groups begin to rally around the case. But the political machine moves forward. Despite Bernard's powerful testimony, the Senate is unmoved. The hearing concludes, and prosecutors bring formal charges. In court, Bernard and Joe face an all-white jury in Texas. The odds are stacked against them. Though much of what they did was legal, using Matt as a front, structuring deals within loopholes, the government frames it as fraud, conspiracy, and mismanagement. The jury convicts both men of misappropriation of bank funds. They are sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Matt, who testified against them, is never charged. His cooperation with the Senate protects him entirely. Meanwhile, the U.S. government seizes Bernard and Joe's assets. The empire they built, once over 170 properties strong, is dismantled. Buildings are repossessed. Bank accounts are frozen. Their real estate network is reduced to nothing. Mainland Bank, the institution that started it all, is sold by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. It's purchased by Robert Florence Jr., the very man who set the trap, for a fraction of what Bernard and Joe originally paid. The two pioneers, once hailed as revolutionary entrepreneurs, are quietly sent to prison. 3 years later, Bernard is released. Joe meets him outside the prison gates. They exchange jokes about who got out first. Despite everything they've lost, both men smile. Eunice, waiting nearby, doesn't understand how they can be cheerful. She reminds them that they've lost nearly everything, but Joe hints that they're not as broke as they seem. Bernard explains. The night before the Senate hearing, Matt called him in secret. He apologized for what he was about to say in court. He told Bernard about the deal with the senator. In that moment, Bernard made one request. He asked Matt to sell off a few remaining assets before the government could seize them. With that money, Matt was to quietly purchase 2 homes, one for Bernard and one for Joe, in the Bahamas. Matt followed through. Though the government seized nearly everything else, they never touched the offshore properties. Bernard and Joe now own 2 oceanfront mansions side by side. Their wealth is reduced, but not destroyed. Their spirit is intact. Though Bernard and Joe lost their empire and served time in prison, their efforts sparked lasting change. Their bold moves in Los Angeles real estate and banking exposed the systemic barriers that Black Americans faced. By acquiring white-only buildings and quietly renting to Black tenants, they disrupted housing segregation in one of the largest cities in the country. They didn't just fight racism, they rewrote the playbook. They used intelligence, strategy, and legal structure to infiltrate a system that was built to keep them out. And though it came at a high cost, their work helped to shift public awareness. 3 years after their testimony before the U.S. Senate, Congress passed the Fair Housing Act of 1968. The law made it illegal to deny the sale or rental of housing based on race, religion, or gender. It was one of the most important pieces of civil rights legislation in American history. The bill didn't mention Bernard Garrett or Joe Morris by name, but their story played a key role in shaping it. Matt Steiner remained out of the public eye. He was never charged and never spoke publicly about the case again. His exact role in the final outcome remains debated, but he honored his final promise to Bernard. As for Bernard and Joe, their friendship endured. They lived side by side in the Bahamas, in homes purchased before their downfall. Their fortune was gone, but their dignity remained. Over time, their story became known, not as a cautionary tale, but as a blueprint for courage under pressure. They showed what it looked like to challenge injustice with intelligence, perseverance, and precision. The Banker is based on their true story,